Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Steven here with Team Euphoric, and this is day 16 of the 80 Days to Your Dream Body course. Today's protein source is going to be turkey thighs, and today's going to be a back training day. And right now, I'm going to be taking you through the strength training anatomy and explaining which muscles are involved during each of the back training exercises. Now, let's get started. And now it is time for the main portion of the resistance training workout. And for the first exercise, we want to pick something that is going to focus on shoulder extension at the glenohumeral joint. For last week, I ended up doing a horizontal pulling exercise. So this week, I'm going to be doing a downward vertical pulling exercise. And the exercise that I have selected is the semi-supinated chin-up. With regard to this exercise right over here, it's going to be really important to, at the bottom position, retract and depress the scapula. That way we can get as much shoulder recruitment and as much shoulder stabilization as possible. Now, let's get into the strength training anatomy and explain which muscles are going to be involved when we are performing the semi-supinated chin-up. First, let's take a look at what's happening at the scapulocoastal joint. At the scapulocoastal joint, as I mentioned, we want to maintain retraction and depression of the scapula at the top position. So our scapular retractors, that's primarily going to be the rhomboids major and minor, as well as the middle fiber of the trapezius. And we're also going to be getting some recruitment from the superior and inferior fibers of the trapezius as well. And then for scapular depression, that's primarily going to be the inferior fibers of the trapezius, the latissimus dorsi muscle, the pectoralis minor, and the inferior fibers of the serratus anterior. Then moving distally from there onto the glenohumeral joint. At the glenohumeral joint, we are doing shoulder extension. Because we are doing shoulder extension, that's primarily going to be the latissimus dorsi muscle, the teres major, the posterior deltoid, and the long head of the triceps brachii. If you recall, the triceps brachii, there are three heads. We have the medial head, the long head, and the lateral head. The medial and lateral head only cross the elbow and are only responsible for elbow extension. However, the long head crosses the elbow and the shoulder posteriorly, which means it's not only responsible for elbow extension, it's also going to be responsible for shoulder extension. And then moving distally from the glenohumeral joint, and we're also going to be focusing, actually, we're going to be coming up to that a little bit later. Moving down from the glenohumeral joint down to the elbow joint. At the elbow joint, we are doing elbow flexion. When we do elbow flexion, that is going to be the biceps group. That's going to be the biceps brachii primarily. So we're going to be training the long and short head of the biceps brachii. We're also going to be training the brachioradialis, the brachialis, and to some extent, we're also going to be getting the pronator teres because the pronator teres is responsible for elbow flexion. It's going to assist. So it's not a main contributor for elbow flexion, but it is going to assist. With regard to the elbow flexors, for this one right over here, it's kind of a hybrid movement. We're not fully supinated, we're not in a neutral grip, it is a semi-supinated. If we were to do full supination, we would get maximum recruitment of the biceps brachii muscles. If we were to do a neutral grip, it would be a little bit more emphasis on the brachioradialis. So because we're doing a semi-supinated grip, this is going to be a nice balance between both the long and short head of the biceps brachii and the brachioradialis. And while we're resting, let's discuss the second exercise that we're going to be performing for the main portion of the resistance training back workout. For the second exercise, we want to pick an exercise that is going to focus on a deduction, adduction in the coronal plane at the glenohumeral joint. For myself, I'm going to be doing a straight bar pronated grip pull-up. With the straight pronated grip pull-up, what I want to do is at the bottom of each repetition, I want to get a nice stretch, and I want to really stretch the scapular retractors and depressors as much as possible. And at the top, I want to activate them as much as possible by squeezing the shoulder blades together and really pulling the shoulder blades down toward the glutes. Now, let's get into the strength training anatomy and explain which muscles are going to be involved for the straight bar pronated grip pull-up. Whenever we are performing a straight bar pronated grip pull-up, we are going to be doing at the scapulocoastal joint scapular retraction and depression. Remember, we want to squeeze the shoulder blades together and down at the top of the motion. So for scapular retraction, that's primarily going to be the rhomboids major and minor, as well as the middle fiber of the trapezius. And we're also going to get recruitment from the superior and inferior fibers of the trapezius as well. And then for scapular depression, that's primarily going to be the inferior fibers of the trapezius, the latissimus dorsi muscle, the pectoralis minor, and the inferior fibers of the serratus anterior. Then moving distally from there over to the glenohumeral joint. At the glenohumeral joint, we are doing a deduction, adduction in the coronal plane. So we're pulling with the elbows tucked out to the sides. When we are performing coronal adduction, that's primarily going to be the latissimus dorsi muscle, the pectoralis major, and more specifically the sternal attachment, because the sternal attachment runs horizontally, so it's going to contract as we get lower into that bottom position. We're also going to be training the teres major as well as the coracobrachialis. To some extent, we're also going to be getting a little bit of recruitment from the infraspinatus. The infraspinatus, even though it is an abductor of the shoulder, a abduction, when we are doing pull-ups, even though it's not responsible for abduction, it is going to help to stabilize the shoulder. So we are going to be getting a little bit of recruitment. It's not going to be a major contributor, but we are going to be using it to stabilize the shoulder, specifically all of the rotator cuff muscles. Next, we are also going to be getting a little bit of involvement from the supraspinatus muscle. The supraspinatus, it's going to depend on the depth of your pull. If you are pulling only to about 45 degrees, you're not really going to get any activity of the supraspinatus. However, the supraspinatus is going to be active in adduction in the coronal plane in 0 to 30 degrees. So that final 30 degrees of the pull, if you're pulling all the way and really squeezing those shoulder blades together, you are going to get some activation of the supraspinatus. And then moving distally from there at the elbow joint, we are doing elbow flexion. When we do elbow flexion, that's going to be the biceps brachii group, both the long and short head, also the brachioradialis, the brachialis, and to a lesser extent, the pronator teres. But the main one is going to be the brachioradialis, because even this is a pronated grip exercise, we are actually in a neutral position. So because we're in a neutral position, we're going to be emphasizing the brachioradialis. And while we're resting, let's discuss the third exercise for the main portion of the resistance training workout for the back day. With regard to the third exercise, we want to pick an exercise that is going to focus on horizontal abduction at the glenohumeral joint. For myself, I'm going to be doing the standing reverse cable fly. Whenever we are doing anything like a standing reverse cable fly, what we are doing at the scapulocoastal joint is retraction and depression. So we really want to focus on squeezing the shoulder blades together and pulling those shoulder blades down. For scapular retraction, you should know this by now, that's going to be the rhomboids major and minor, as well as the middle fiber of the trapezius. And we're also going to be getting involvement from the superior and inferior fibers of the trapezius as well. And then for scapular depression, that's primarily going to be the inferior fibers of the trapezius, the latissimus dorsi muscle, the pectoralis minor, and the inferior fibers of the serratus anterior. Then moving distally from there over to the glenohumeral joint. At the glenohumeral joint, we are doing horizontal abduction. So that is going to be primarily the posterior deltoid, the infraspinatus, and the teres minor. And then moving distally over down to the elbow joint. At the elbow joint, even though we are not actively extending the elbows, we are maintaining an isometric contraction of the elbow extensors. The elbow extensors, that is primarily going to be the triceps brachii group, all three heads. We're going to be getting the medial head, the long head, and the lateral head of the triceps. And with regard to this exercise right over here, whenever we do tricep extension, we also are going to be getting some assistance from the anconeus muscle, because the anconeus muscle does assist in elbow extension. Thanks for sticking around until the end of the video. Be sure to like, share, and leave a comment, as it'll help the algorithm. And if you enjoyed the content, show your support by subscribing to the channel by clicking on the icon in the bottom right corner. And if you really want to show your support, then consider becoming a member by clicking on the icon in the bottom left corner. These new high-quality videos aren't cheap to edit, and the $5 membership will really help with the video editing budget. You'll also get access to a ton of exclusive perks, like early access to videos and this program design lecture playlist in the top right-hand corner. And if you want to learn how to do a one-armed pull-up, then check out the playlist on the top left corner.